Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do. To educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level.
All right, what's going on, everybody? So today's show is something a little different for us on the Next Level Human podcast. I got Joe Vennare here from Fitt Insider. Fitt Insider is a company that focuses really on the tech behind what all of us love in health and fitness. So we're just going to get into this discussion. I am a tech guy. Before we got started, I was just telling Joe that I have every piece of health tech there seems that is in existence. I have all kinds of stuff all over the place, but I'm hoping that he can kind of guide us into what we should be looking at in the future, what is currently available to us, and then just an overarching sort of theme about how tech is going to evolve and how we all can use it. But Joe, to get started, why don't you get us caught up on telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Fitt Insider, and then let's get into this very sort of interesting conversation about tech in the fitness industry.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Super stoked to be here and chat all things. Yeah. Fitness, tech, innovation. But we come to it. I say we, my brother and I have worked in the health and fitness industry for, 10 plus years, probably 12 years at this point, all around, our mission, building businesses that help people live a healthier lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And that has evolved and grew over time from first as, kids who are overweight growing up in a big Italian family. Like, how do we get ourselves in shape? Fortunately, getting into sports at an early age, I played high school and college football. Anthony played high school football and went to the Marines. And then we got into personal training, group fitness, you name it. And that was first to make a buck, try to get a little extra money. But our passion for that really grew as we were able to impact more people. And at first that was training one person in a park, just them paying us $10 and working out in the local field. And that grew into classes, that grew into physical locations, eventually opened a 12,000 square foot, functional training center, and then multiple locations. And yeah, again, it kind of evolved and grew organically over time. I think fortunately got into the, media, internet, virtual products, information products at a time that was pretty early on, I think, an evolution of that. And then more recently, call it in the last 5 years, into the startup and technology world. So early stage companies, investments, really figuring out what's next, what's working, what's not. And yeah, being, I think, very forward looking in terms of what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, that's why I was excited to talk to you, man, because from my perspective, and I'll just give you sort of this is the first time, by the way, for those of you listening, that Joe and I have actually met and talked. And so I want to give you a little bit of a background, Joe, just on sort of how I look at this and then jump into kind of getting your take on this. So to me, I get very excited about fitness tech. And one of the big reasons that I do think dovetails into a little bit of what you were saying is that from my perspective, one of the things that we forget in health and fitness is we treat everyone the same. So there's a couple things that I look at here. Number one, the metabolism is speaking to us all the time. And it is giving us biofeedback sensations like the way we sleep, our hunger, our energy, our cravings, exercise performance, exercise recovery, libido, menses, erections, digestive function, signs and symptoms, headaches, joint pains, things like that. All of this is stuff that we feel and is relatively subjective, right? And so for me, I'm always excited about, are there tools and technologies? Obviously, as a clinician, I take blood pressures, I take respiration rates. I look at blood labs. So I'm looking at biomarkers in the body. And I'm also using tech a lot of time to do treatments. And so I am very excited about this idea of, can we take some of this objective data to help us understand more of what our metabolism is saying, and more specifically, how to individualize things, because we are all a little bit different. And so I am really interested in understanding how to use tech to get more specific about how our bodies are responding to things. And so I know Fitt Insider is something that I was excited about when a mutual friend of ours, Chase Tuning, told me about you. I was like, well, this is really cool, because this is going to be someone who sort of understands this tech at a different level in terms of what is coming on the market. So I guess the first thing I would say is, how do you feel when you hear me say something like that? Like, we can get subjective data, but we also can get a lot of objective data, and the tech might help us there. Is that how you see it as well? Or how do you frame sort of this whole tech side of things, and why it might be important for people interested in health and fitness?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good framing. And for me, it's somewhat of a contradiction, right? And because at some level, doing the right things, quote unquote, right, moving more, eating the right foods, sleeping, prioritizing your mental health, just focusing on your overall well-being, a lot of those things are free. You get to bed on time, you eat the right foods, although you have to buy them. Like, that's a disciplines thing. Doing body weight exercises, walking more, being physically active, doing those things in theory isn't all that difficult. Yet the majority of people obviously struggle with them when you look at, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, the rate of sedentary lifestyles. So there's a conflict there. And I think part of what the health and fitness industry does is they try to provide turnkey and foolproof solutions, right? And so that's where you see a lot of the apps, a lot of the different pieces of equipment, a lot of the technology moving in that direction. At the same time, what you get is complexity, right? They get more expensive. You need to have some level of understanding of how to use the technology. You collect all this data. What do we do with it? So at some points, I look at it and I say, we don't need this, that if you formed healthy habits, you should in turn get healthier over time. And that's a matter of consistency and discipline and willpower. But on the other side of the spectrum, it's like, obviously it's not working for the vast majority of people. So clearly there's an opportunity to create solutions that help them, like you said, identify these biomarkers, these inputs, how we're reacting to things, hopefully over time, even preventing these things from happening in the onset, being kind of predictive in what's going on with our bodies. So I think, like, with that framing, the end goal of all of this is, I think that it's important to say, let's not focus on where the technology is today. In the same way, if you think about where computers started, or television, radio, smartwatches, you name it, we are somewhere in the progression between wearing an Oura ring or sleeping on an 8-sleep mattress, and fast forward however many years it is, where all of these things, whether it's ambient sensors or, more powerful technology in terms of what's packed into a smartwatch or ring, it's all happening in real time. And the outputs we're getting in terms of data, the information, it's all seamless in terms of what to do with it, how to respond to it, what you can do with a coach, what your doctor's receiving. So I think we're just early on in that evolution.
Yeah, I like that thought process. And what it comes up for me too is that, how do you know that you might need this kind of stuff? Like, I tell the people who watch and listen to me, I get questions all the time. They're like, Jade, I see you're wearing an Oura ring, or I heard you talk about the continuous glucose monitor, or do I really need, an 8-sleep mattress? That, for those who don't know, I've done a podcast on that as well with the CEO of 8-Sleep. It's just a biotech mattress that keeps you cool at night, adjusts temperature, and also measures certain biometrics. But the idea is, there are so many things coming. For example, I won't mention the name of this particular product because I'm not hating on it, but I'm also like, don't love it. But there's a particular product where people will send me, and you can breathe gases into it. It measures CO2 and O2 levels, and can kind of tell you, based on that, if you're burning more carbohydrate or fat. There's not much we can do with that data once we get that, from my perspective. And it's still not dealing with the ultimate calorie levels that you might be taking in. And so the point I'm making here is that there's this idea of like, okay, so we have some of the tech, some of it may not be useful, and then some of it may be useful, but might not be appropriate for that particular individual, as you mentioned, due to certain price points, or perhaps just not something that is useful for them. Like not everyone is going to want to wear or need to wear a continuous glucose monitor, but someone who is confused about why they might be having excess hunger or cravings or unpredictable energy levels or unpredictable workout recovery and performance might benefit from some of these things. So I guess the question I have for you, if you have an opinion on this, and one of the things that Joe shared with me too, is that he's a kind of a tech geek in a sense, but he's not a scientist with these things as well. And so as I ask him questions, I'm going to be asking more about the opinion of someone who is looking at this stuff and all the new stuff and all the old stuff and seeing stuff that all of us may not know is coming or may not necessarily appreciate. So when you think about this idea of, certain tech that may be cool tech, but doesn't really do much for anybody versus other stuff that might be appropriate for some people, do you have any sense now of what might be the most valuable pieces of tech for the most people? Or do you see this as completely individualized? I'm just curious if you have an opinion where you're like talking to friends and family, you're like, this is something that everyone could or should probably get, whereas this other thing here is probably a nice to have, and this other thing over here is sort of useless. So I'm just curious what your thought process is on all the stuff that's coming, because I would imagine more and more stuff is coming.
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot, both from, even someone, my mom, right, will see an ad, whatever, on Instagram or on the television and be like, hey, I want to get XYZ thing, whether it's a piece of connected fitness tech, like a hydro rower. She's like, oh, should I get a rower? I'm like, well, why would you want a rower? And she's like, I don't know. Like it looks fantastic. It looks really fun, whatever it is. And same thing. She's more recently got into, she wears a Fitbit and just likes to track her steps. And does that help her in terms of her overall health goals, and has it inspired her to get moving? And, she takes screenshots and sends us her steps in the day. Yeah, it works for her and it inspires her to get moving. So I think it's a much more individualized kind of approach. I oftentimes start by asking people like, what is your goal? What are you hoping to do? What are you doing now? What isn't working? And some of those on-ramps can be as simple as, an analog, you all know these, these things like an analog food journal, or just, writing it down and sending it to a dietitian, nutritionist, or even a friend to keep you accountable. Whereas on the other side of that, you mentioned things like the glucose monitor, using that and for some people, seeing the spikes, right? Being able to be like, oh, I thought this, whatever, bowl of oatmeal, or I thought sushi, whatever, was healthy. And they see that their glucose is going off the chart. They have that realization. So I think it is individualized. I think it's on a case by case basis. And I wouldn't say I have seen anything that across the board is like, you should use this. And I'm very much like you. Fortunately, folks send stuff all the time, and I get to try a bunch of different things and have you name it. I've pretty much tried it. Yeah. I don't use anything. I don't use any device. I don't use any wearable. I don't track anything on a consistent basis, because it was making me like neurotic. I was already obsessing about these things way too much. So for my goals, it was actually making it worse for me. So I think in terms of, if you kind of fast forward, where the broader industry hopes to get is like, these things are super intuitive. They're widely accessible, and we don't have to interpret the data. It's interpreted for us, and it's made into actionable and personalized kind of outcomes. Whereas now, again, you use the devices, and you even mentioned, the one, which I think I know which one the product you don't like so much. It's like, what do I do with that information? Yeah. It's not, entirely clear. So, well, why would I continue to pay for it? And how do I know I'm improving on the other side of that?
Sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get, almost like carrying around pure protein, low carb protein in your pocket. These Paleo Valley beef sticks are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats, and they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And two, you are helping your health. And three, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted, and raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. PaleoValley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now back to the show.
The way I look at this is, let's go just very simple, right? Like you talked about a food journal, literally something that you open up and write stuff in, or, perhaps more tech oriented, but still old school, a scale. And so from my perspective, it's like, okay, if you're somebody who steps on a scale and see that scale go up or down, does it give you information or does it have an emotional response in you that is good or bad? So for example, if you tell me, look, I got a scale, but anytime I step on it, if it goes up, then I feel defeated. I'm less motivated. It doesn't make me go to the gym and work harder. It makes me crave Ben and Jerry's and eat a bunch of pasta. And this is how the personal preferences, right? And the psychology of people come into this. So when I talk about the individual nature of metabolism, I say, well, we're each individually we're individuals in our physiology, in our psychology, in our personal preferences, and in our practical circumstances. And I think in the tech world that perhaps the psychology aspect, which you alluded to, is a big one, because what is this doing to you? If it's making you neurotic, then that's just another form of stress toxicity. The metabolism is really just one big stress barometer, and it is responding to that stress. So if it's stressful for you and making you neurotic, perhaps that's not a good thing. If the emotional response to stepping on a scale that is up a little bit causes you to eat more and worse as a result of that, which many people do. Now, there's certainly subtypes of people who go, oh my God, that's going to motivate me. That motivates me to eat less and better and get to the gym. But we all know people who are defeated by certain things and people who are motivated by certain things. So when I'm talking to people similar to you, these are the things I'm asking them. Like, what do you need? Now, obviously, I do believe we should be measuring and tracking things. If you're not getting results, if you've never learned what a protein is versus a carb, then you probably want to be paying attention to that. So then a piece of tech like the MyFitnessPal app might be a really good piece of information for you. However, if you're getting on a scale and it is stressing you out and making you do worse things later, perhaps you need to move to something else like circumference measurements or, body fat percent or some other measure. So I agree. There's these psychological aspects of us. There's these personal preference aspects of us. And then there's also these practical circumstances, which come down to money and things like that. But for me, I oftentimes tell people very much the same thing. They're like, what do I need? I'm like, well, you need to understand the food you're putting into your body. So at some way, shape, and form, if you're not getting results, many people don't need to do this, by the way, they're probably going to need to track food in some way. And the apps are, really good for that. You also probably want to be looking at results in terms of body change. If you're looking at weight loss. And we know from the National Weight Control Registry, these are two things that people do consistently who lose the weight and keep it off for good. If we're talking strictly weight loss, we're not always talking about that. But those would be the two things I would say. The only really two things I would say are necessary for the vast majority of people. And to your point, not everybody. But then it starts getting into all these other things. For example, if you're someone who's very stressed out and don't know how your stress is impacting you, then perhaps you want to get something that can measure your heart rate variability. We now have the ability to see in real time how things are going in terms of your recovery and your readiness. And many apps and devices have those scores there to include those. And so it really is sort of this thing where I'm like, well, what are you really after? And what is going to make you do better versus what might make you do worse? So it's interesting to me to hear a tech guy like you doesn't use any of this stuff. So I wonder if that brings up any thoughts for you. And I have some other things I want to cover if not, but I just want to see what your thoughts are about that approach for people.
It's 100% true and accurate. And I think that's where it's almost like there needs to be some type of on-ramp, where we say that the industry is introducing complexity. It's way easier to make money selling a lot of these devices than it is to make an impact or make a difference. How many people are continuing to use them over a period of time, and what are those results? Like, there's not a ton of evidence that it actually works or that the outcomes are any better. Yeah. So people are selling a lot of devices, but they aren't necessarily to the point where they are having that wide impact. And the pessimistic view is like, well, they're just kind of cashing in on this trend and they know that, and they're taking advantage of people. The optimistic view is like, they're just trying to figure it out. Also, they know they have not arrived at a point where it's like completely turnkey and magically people are healthy. But I think if we look at the just evolution of technology more broadly, it will get closer to that point. So I think that's just kind of one piece of it. Yeah. And the next piece is an interesting trend that's started to emerge is using this technology and the tracking and all of the devices as almost, we kind of say like activity tracking is evolving into health monitoring, is evolving into medical devices. So actually getting to the point where it is FDA approved, there have been clinical studies, these things actually work, right? Because all of these devices now that we use on a consumer level, they're just wellness devices, quote unquote, wellness devices. They have not passed any rigorous study other than, maybe trials that the companies themselves have funded and studied. So it is not proven out. But what has started to emerge, and this is kind of what you were talking about, when it's like maybe working with somebody, having a coach or a doctor or any type of kind of professional look at this information. It's called human in the loop. So you're taking this technology and instead of me using it by myself off of my own little world and trying to figure it out, they pair that, maybe it's a glucose monitor, maybe it's an Oura Ring, a Whoop, with an actual coach who you can text anytime, who you can have check-ins with, who reviews the information and dissects it for you. They tell you what to do based on what they're seeing. That being like a huge step forward. Whereas before it was, maybe I have a personal trainer that I pay hundreds of dollars per session for that probably still isn't addressing nutrition with me, mental health, sleep, all those other aspects. Whereas now I can have a device who's tracking all of this stuff in real time, capturing it, and then somebody or a group of people, right? Whether it's a fitness professional, a doctor, a nutritionist, a coach, all going over this information and then telling me what to do based on that. Yep. So that being a huge step forward and an interesting trend. And just maybe throw it back to you there before going further down that path. Yeah.
And actually you and I haven't talked about this because obviously it's the first time we're talking and meeting, but my company, metabolic.com, with my business partners, what we have been building is exactly what you're talking about. So we have a system that essentially says, look, we're going to teach you, if you want to do this yourself, we're going to teach you how to subjectively understand your metabolism. We're going to give you the tools to do that. We have a coaching program, an individualized coaching program that is 4-tier, kind of imagine Noom times 4 with, a free version, then all the way up that allows you to text in and, talk to a coach. Even at the free level, we have an individualized nutrition sort of approach, and we have our workout system. We start with, and this is just kind of helping some people understand a little bit about what I think you were talking about. How we started in all of this is helping people understand how to do certain things that are going to be the big movers, and then understanding how those things impact with your physiology, your psychology, your personal preferences, and your practical circumstances, and moving people along from the standpoint of like, oh, I can do this by myself versus I need a little bit of help from an app and a little bit of nudges here and there just from an app versus no, I prefer, a human in the loop, as you talk about. And so our company is looking at all of those and actually being able to integrate all that data. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to say, look, we know you have this subjective biofeedback. We also know you've got how your weight is changing and those things, your vitals and your blood labs. But then we also know based on the individual that they're going to be coming in with certain tech. And so we're including in our system the ability to grab that tech, share it with our professionals that work with us, but also make sense of the disparate data out there from many different types of technology into this system. So regardless of what you are using, we can grab some of that data. And some of the things that are important to us are things like HRV. Blood sugar certainly is important. What you're eating and how it's impacting your blood sugar. Sleep is a really big one, which there's all kinds of, they seem to be some of the most popular tech, but there's all kinds of issues around whether they're giving us good data or not. But at least our company is doing exactly what you're talking about here. We're essentially using the tech and deciphering the tech for people at different levels, whether they're wanting to do it themselves, whether they just need some support in an app, or whether they need a human in the mix. And then we're also trying to gamify this so that people can build in, the habits around the tech that the tech itself may not have. So that's part of how we're beginning to integrate this stuff. And I'm curious, based on that approach, just from, you're not going to hurt my feelings here if you disagree with this approach, but do you see many people and many companies beginning to do this? Do you see this as a potential good sign and good trend? And what do you see as the downside to incorporating so much tech? Is there anything there that you can say positively or negatively in regards to these approaches that we're using and other companies I know are beginning to use?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I think that you're starting to see it at the kind of biggest jump going directly to doctors, right? So Apple introduced a feature last year where you can share your health kit data with, a family member or a medical professional. And even that is like a step between like integrating this information so that it can be actionable. We can, move to a preventative healthcare model versus a sick care model. But as it relates to kind of like every different aspect of health, there are folks doing this down the path of fitness. So Future is a remote personal training company. We're an investor in them, and something like that, where I talk about this in a podcast with their CEO. My fiance, who's wasn't an athlete, never huge into exercise beyond going to the gym, getting on the elliptical, et cetera. She's been working out for almost 18 months consistently, 3 days a week, has not missed a workout in 18 months because of this remote coach that she has. And she texts him and they review the Apple Watch data and they make personalized workout plans. And there are people doing this in nutrition and mental health and down the path, all very much, like telemedicine, and the devices and the apps are enabling that remote aspect of it to keep people accountable, which is, if you're solving for accountability or willpower, which is where most people typically fail, you're taking a huge step down the path of improving that adherence to the behavior change, like over time, right? That's the outcome that people want to see.
Yeah, 100%.
I want to jump in real quick and tell you about one of my favorite new products. And to start out, I want to ask you a question. If you had to follow your friends around who are not the healthiest in the world and see what they are doing, what would be the number one thing you would probably tell them to do to start? For most people, that's going to be drinking more water, right? This is something that we talk about all the time in health and fitness. It's almost as if we think of it as an afterthought now, because obviously water is so crucial. However, we oftentimes get this wrong. For example, did you know that when it comes to hydration, just drinking water can make things worse? Most people don't know this. Why? Partly because most people are over drinking water and under consuming the electrolytes that help water do its job. What we don't realize is that hydration is not just about water. It's about electrolytes, the minerals in there, as well as getting that water into the cells. And so you do not want to be over consuming water if you're not getting your electrolytes right. And this opens up a whole new discussion because most people are not getting their electrolytes right. For example, did you know that low sodium, too low sodium, is an issue? Just as much, if not more so, than high sodium. In other words, what we want if we're going to get the right electrolytes is to get the right amount of sodium and potassium and magnesium in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it just right. This opens up a whole other thing here too, because people who are exercising, doing sauna therapies, doing low carb diets are disrupting and losing lots and lots of their electrolytes. For example, when insulin is not around in low carb diets, you will excrete lots of sodium. In other words, under that state, exercising, low carb diets, all these things, you actually need more sodium. And so if you're somebody who has been just drinking water, not paying attention to electrolytes, and also feeling fatigued, feeling like you're underperforming, not sleeping right, getting cramps, twitches, headaches, any of these things, then you are probably dealing with an electrolyte issue. This is where the product Element comes in. This product has been a game changer for me and many of my patients and clients. This is a rehydration electrolyte beverage, basically. It is a powder of electrolytes formulated with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium without the added sugar and other nonsense that comes in beverages like Gatorade. This stuff is basically a rehydration beverage on steroids. It is the thing that is going to replenish your electrolytes in the right ratios, decrease fatigue, really correct chronic dehydration. And by the way, many people are dehydrating themselves, becoming hyponatremic, low sodium, when they're consuming too much water. You need your electrolytes on board, especially if you are someone who is losing lots of sodium and other electrolytes through low carb diets and lots of exercise. This is where Element comes in. I cannot recommend this product enough. I have been using this stuff for months now, and I have immediately seen changes in my energy levels. I feel like I'm operating on a whole other level, and I have seen this as being the primary thing that people who have been using Element have been telling me, that their fatigue is getting better, especially fatigue that comes after very intense workouts that involve lots of sweating and lots of intense output from the nervous system. So go ahead and check out Element. To do so, you can go to the link drjade.com/drink LMNT. drjade.com/drink LMNT. When you use that link and make a purchase through that link, Element will give you a free sample pack of every flavor they have. I love this company. I love what it does for me and the people I've been giving it to. I hope you will check them out. Love that they're on board with Next Level Human, and I hope you will give them your patronage. Let's get back to the show.
I think the things that are, as you go further down that path and kind of zoom out, one of the issues is, a lot of the different services and a lot of the different devices are very siloed. So you might have your sleep tracker. You might have something else you use for nutrition. You have another thing, subscription, membership, piece of equipment that you use for fitness.
Mm-hmm.
You still make your own meals and have to figure that out on your own. So the ability to have some integrated end to end, right? Either platform or expert coach, I think is something that we'll see start to become more important, more evident. There will be more companies kind of pursuing that in like a turnkey fashion versus sending somebody out there and them having to figure it out across all these different aspects of health and wellness. And then the other thing is like, we're just beginning to understand, can we measure blood glucose without a needle, without poking somebody in the skin, and do it over the top of with just a patch, or do it measuring sweat, or do it measuring whatever the other, input is. All those things are moving to the forefront in terms of, like I said, patches, but even as far as like tattoos, where they're just putting almost like a sticker on you that can decipher this information. So as we start to understand cortisol levels, blood alcohol levels of, doing blood testing without having to go to the lab, like all of those things are getting us to the point where we can make meaningful interpretations of this information, be preventative about it, and then be very personalized in that prescription that you're talking about, right? Where it's like, hey, these are the things that you need to do based on all the information that we're seeing. And it's not incumbent upon you, the individual, to figure that all out.
Yeah, that's what we're doing, trying to do at Metabolic. We are essentially, and that company, for those, because people have been waiting for this for a while who follow this podcast, we still have not launched, but we actually did just launch our, footprint in online and as our app. But what we are trying to do is exactly what you're talking about. We're trying to integrate all this data, so it's a one-stop shop and a framework for understanding metabolism, rather than being in all these sort of other places. One of the things that I am most excited about, because I've heard that Apple is perhaps working on, actually, I thought it's coming soon, but it wasn't this Apple Watch, that they have the ability, or working on the ability, to measure blood sugar non-invasively. And so I'm super excited about that kind of technology. And my understanding of that technology is that if we figure this out using essentially lights, lasers that are essentially looking at absorption and reflection of certain things traveling through the blood, that if we can do that, we're not only going to be able to get glucose, we're going to be able to get things like cholesterol, triglycerides, and all these other analytes. Are you seeing that is close? Is that something that is, in the future for us tech wise, or is that something that you feel like the technology is just not going to be there anytime soon?
It's a little bit further off. Mm-hmm. So Apple has kind of said, of course, Apple being the massive company that they are and incredible with marketing and brand, it's very much at the forefront. So folks often hear like, they're working on this, and it was supposed to be in the most recent watch operating system that was released. It wasn't. They hit a bunch of snags in terms of development. The other feature that they're working on is the blood pressure monitoring. So the ability to do that, obviously heart disease being a massive issue alongside diabetes. And basically they're saying it's not ready for prime time, and it's definitely not ready to be at the level where it could get FDA approval. So as it's starting to develop, you're also starting to see kind of the biggest companies, a duopoly, if you will, in the space of like continuous glucose monitoring, Dexcom and Abbott, are developing and investing in these technologies to do more non-invasive glucose monitoring. Yeah. And both of them, interestingly, moving beyond, they've typically been like a diabetic focused, so medical device company, getting into consumer biowearables. Yeah. So targeting, how do we work with people who are athletes? How do we work with people in the military? What do these biomarkers really mean from the perspective of, we understand what it means if you're already unwell, or if you have a disease, right? And what to do about it. But there's also this idea, if we cater to people at kind of the pinnacle of performance, military, athletes, et cetera, then we can reverse engineer or almost trickle down health, like how this impacts people on like an everyday basis. Yeah. So I think in terms of development, there's a ton of interesting things happening. And the kind of most exciting piece, if you will, is like, there's just a ton of people focusing on it. There's a ton of people talking about it in a way that even 2 years ago, nobody beyond somebody who was diabetic was talking about wearing a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah, 100%.
To now it's like, oh, could we do that? There's a company called Known Labs, and they're working on scanning technology. They read like radio waves that you're from your body. So they scan it over your palm and they get all the readings that we're talking about: glucose, cholesterol, triglycerides, etc. And the former head of kind of partnerships at Oura Ring left and is now working at Known Labs. So it's like, and they're pursuing FDA approval.
Yeah,
so it's like
exploding, in other words.
Yeah, all these things. It's like it's a matter of time before we make that meaningful progress to like we know that it works. More importantly, we know what to do with the information once we have it. And then it gets introduced into both the consumer and clinical setting in a way that like we can start to hopefully see meaningful outcomes.
Yeah. Let's do this to wrap up. If you don't mind. You may balk at some of these because you may just be like, I'd rather not say, or I don't know. But one of the things I think might be helpful for the listeners is if we just go through different categories and see if you can kind of say, yeah, I know of something that's coming, or I really like this for you. So I'll just kind of go through a few and see if you have any thoughts on them. So I know that in the world of resistance training, we're now getting machines that you basically have a one big footprint, mainly pulleys that are doing things like, you can get up to 2,000 pounds on that thing. And what do you think, or are you aware of any really cool things that you're just like, oh, this is really cool in the realm of workout equipment that is here or that is coming that you might just say, yeah, Jay, this is something you might want to check out?
Yeah. So I'll start that as I usually do by saying, I have a full blown, a garage gym that has turned into a full basement gym. So I have the bumper plates, the kettlebells, the, Concept 2 rower, and all the things that you would think of from like a kind of meathead garage gym. So again, I don't use much of the high tech stuff. That being said, strength training is an area where there's been incredible kind of innovation more recently. And full disclosure, we're an investor in a company. It's called Arena. That is a small platform. It weighs, call it around 50 pounds, but does exactly what you said. It can generate hundreds of pounds of force. And so I have one of those, and it's really incredible to be able to throw that in the back of the truck and you take an entire gym literally anywhere. My brother has one, and it's he lives in an apartment, and to have a full gym in an apartment in a 50 pound, 60 pound device is pretty insane. So that's been huge. But then you also have ones that are targeting the commercial sector. So a company called Oxfit, based out of Dallas, they have it's a much larger machine. It looks like a traditional Smith machine, but it's all high tech. So it has force plates on the bottom, the ability for you to sign in and put your workout in. It automatically adjusts the weights and does everything for you. And they're in like, professional sports teams, football teams have them, and physical therapy centers have them as well. And they have like an at-home one as well. So that's another good example. And then one that I don't even think they released the product yet. It might be in like a closed beta. It's called Kabata. Kabata. It's smart dumbbells. So it's like that selectorized dumbbell that you've seen, but tracks the reps, tells you what weight you should use, monitors everything that you're doing, designs the workout for you, so on and so forth, which like same idea. Lots of people could buy a set of dumbbells, but what the heck am I supposed to do with it?
Yeah.
Do I know what I'm doing? And is there any progressive overload over time? Am I improving? So super interesting. And that's just like on the strength training front. Okay.
So Arena, Oxfit, Kabata are things that we all might want to check out. How about in the arena of measuring body composition? I know we have certain things that, they use lasers to look at subcutaneous fat around the belly, or we have, smart tape measures, or we have devices that I've seen that can take pictures, do your measurements, extrapolate, a body fat percent from that. Anything in that arena where we're measuring body composition or, measuring that kind of stuff that you think is cool or useful, or are we just not there yet?
Probably the closest one. It's a French device maker called Withings. And they started with a watch, and now they've evolved. Their most recent product is a scale. And so you stand on the scale. Not only does it do your weight, but it also does like your heart rate. It does like an EKG, and it also does body composition. So it'll tell you basically all of that, send it directly to the app. and they're building like an ecosystem, right? So it's the scale, the watch. They have a mat that you use in bed, and also a blood pressure cuff that you can do readings with, and it feeds all that back into the app and obviously kind of puts it all together for you. So, and they have on a lot of their devices, FDA approval or pending FDA approval. So it's a consumer facing company, but definitely going down that path of like legit medical validation.
Yeah. A couple of years back, I got a product called Naked. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's basically a scale you sit on, smart mirror that basically shoots lasers at you, spins you around, does all your measurements, and then extrapolates body fat percent off that. It worked for about a year, broke down. Then it's been hell working with them. I did like that machine just because it was an easy thing, but it just goes into how tough some of these bigger things are to get customer support on. How about in the, you talked a little bit about this, but how about in step trackers and just things like that integrate, movement patterns and, or at least the movement activity, anything that you love there? I mean, I know Fitbit is a huge player. I know Aura has that, most of these things, your phone even has a step counter, but is there anything that you just love that you're like, well, these are, cool products in that area in terms of step counting and that kind of stuff? Yeah,
I think there's, it's not directly step tracking, but even the idea of like what comes after just using an accelerometer or the GPS to track your activity. Mm-hmm. And so you have something like Strava, right? Which a lot of people use. It's very popular with like cyclists and runners. But them moving more into like hiking and trail sports and just like getting people outside in general. So using these things to track activity, getting more social with how they're sharing that data. And then we invested in a company called Any Distance. It started out as like a run and walking kind of tracker, but now it's evolved into a kind of like Web3, very like gamified version of Strava. So different challenges within the app, sharing that information socially, collecting badges, companies doing like product drops, like let's say a Lululemon or Athletic Greens doing a product drop within that. And if you've completed certain tasks or activity metrics, you can get that. So I think those are super cool. There's not a ton, right, in terms of making those things beyond collecting the information and you sharing it with your friend. Like, well, how do you do competitions? How do you do sharing that data? How do you meet new people potentially or find out about events or meetups? So all that type of stuff. And then I also think it's interesting when you get beyond the phone or a wrist wearable, like smart insoles. So there's a company called Plantiga that's kind of developing down that path, like gait monitoring. Do you have imbalances? How's your posture? How's your force output in production? A lot of things that are way more interesting, right? If you're like a runner or a triathlete, but certainly has potential for elderly populations that are like a fall risk or are starting to lose like balance and those sorts of things. Yeah. So I think there will be a lot down that path as well. I've also heard
that, there's going to be smart clothing coming along as well. Sure. And there actually is that has biometrics in the clothing and things like that. And so that's really neat what's sort of going on there. How about things like, the performance, like I would consider things like Whoop, R Ring, things like that more, and like sort of the performance biohacking, rest recovery type of stuff. Anything there that you love that is sort of integrating lots of data to tell you how you're performing, how you're sleeping, how you're recovering that you love, or the ones I mentioned, sort of the ones that you like as well.
Yeah, those are definitely the mainstream, if you will, and the ones that are kind of at the forefront. I'm trying to think just in terms of beyond those basic metrics. I think kind of two things that we're starting to see, obviously glucose monitoring being one of them, used in the performance setting, specifically a company called Super Sapiens. They're primarily in Europe right now, but their glucose monitor, but targeting endurance athletes. So
it makes complete sense. The endurance athletes definitely have to have their glucose dialed in.
For sure. So they have a partnership with Ironman, right? And a lot of those athletes are using it, but they also developed a wrist-worn kind of component of the glucose monitor that displays your glucose and tells you when you should be fueling based on your performance levels. So to your point around that, like that's pretty compelling, right? And it's definitely for a specific audience. It's not for everyone. But the application is like, you cannot the term hitting the wall in terms of like training or competition literally means when you're out of glucose, you cannot go any further.
Yeah.
So this telling you about that is huge.
Yeah, it would be really interesting. I'm really interested when they finally get both for diabetics in my population, but even for athletes, in looking at glucose and ketone correlations, beta hydroxybutyrate and glucose, because obviously they move in different directions, right? So I guess if you have ketones up here and you have low blood sugar, that's a different story than if you have low ketones and low blood sugar, and so there's a lot of cool things sort of going. And there's one more thing I wanted to ask you, but it went out of my mind. Let me see what is in relation to. We covered workout stuff. We covered trackers. We covered mattresses and things like that. So I do sleep on an 8 Sleep. People have heard me talk about 8 Sleep. I do have an affiliate link somewhere for 8 Sleep. And anything else, Chili Pad's another one. Anything else in that arena with sleep, high-tech mattresses or devices that are measuring sleep. One of the things that I have always wondered about and have talked to several, because in my field, and I'm sure with you too, you get to talk to lots of different experts and lots of colleagues. And there's a whole argument about you can't measure these stages of sleep directly through these devices. They're only correlating based on temperature, respiration, movement patterns, that kind of thing. But they're saying, some people are saying they're within 80%. Other people are saying they're not even close. Yeah. So it's kind of all over the place, in terms of who you talk to and how tight they are. But just curious, any thoughts you have in that arena? Because I know at least that's one thing that most people are interested in, the sleep, sleep devices to help you sleep better or to measure sleep, and to deal with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a good answer, right? Both on the research and on the efficacy of a lot of the devices. I also, you mentioned talking to Matteo, the CEO of 8 Sleep. I know him decently well, and I've had him on the podcast a couple of times. And I think, again, back to the optimistic view, the pessimistic view being we're just all wasting our time and money trying to do this stuff. The optimistic view being like, okay, we're definitely making progress, and even like adjusting the temperature and all those things is helping. They have talked about both the ability to potentially compress sleep, right? That we get it dialed in from a technology standpoint so much that they help you fall asleep faster. They get you to deep sleep faster and you stay there longer. And the quality of sleep is so much better that 6 hours of sleep, that 8 hours of sleep, rather, you can get that in 6 hours. Mm-hmm. So can you compress sleep? That's super far off. And even they will admit that, but even thinking like, oh, that's a possibility is pretty insane. Yeah. And also the idea that like we spend, so whatever that stat is, like a huge percentage of our life sleeping. Well, what if it can do other things while you're sleeping? Like perform some type of diagnostic test, do a scan of your body, measure whatever, blood, heart rate, other biometrics to maybe diagnose a disease or signal that something is wrong in the same way that we're starting to see wearables do now. Like, oh, hey, you have a fever, like you're getting sick. Like all of those things packed into like a legit medical bed. Like it's not far off in terms of just if you think about how quickly things from an innovation standpoint accelerate. So nothing to report as of yet. I'm also skeptical. It sounds like as you are, but exciting to think about the potential.
Yeah. I appreciate you, man. So why don't we end just by anything that you feel like the listener should be paying attention to, things that you feel like that are exciting to you, that you feel like these are the things I'm paying attention to, and just what we should be keeping in mind, or any other thoughts you have.
I think the biggest thing for me, and I don't know if it's directly relevant to the listeners, but I think it could impact them, right? Is so much of the conversation that we've talked about today, and again, is a contradiction, but a lot of this is the fit, get fitter. A lot of these products are for people who are already healthy, or maybe have disposable income, or already are inclined to be investing in their health and wellness. So when you look at all the opportunities, whether it's from accessibility or from a price point or from an ease of use, or even things like gamification and virtual reality or whatever it is, if we can continue to come up with ways that appeal to more people beyond the audience that's already going to be spending money on these things, that's the thing that I get most fired up about. And, that's what we try to cover and look at at Fitt Insider. So that's the thing that, I get excited about every day.
Yeah, you know what, man? I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I feel like has happened in the health and fitness world is that, you basically see that you wonder, well, why aren't people making progress in all these stats? And it is, I feel like, because so many of us who are interested in fitness are only caring about, talking about, and most of it's unconscious. We're certainly not doing this on purpose, but we're also dealing with our tribe and talking to amongst each other and thinking that everyone's on board, instead of going out and being like, what do we do for people who are not interested in any of this stuff, who need it perhaps even more than we do? And how can we deal with them? And metabolic.com, my company, is trying to do that as well. So it's really interesting that you and I think, are on a lot on the same wavelength there. I do think the health and fitness industry, unfortunately, for a lot of us, are just talking back and forth. And I have heard, people talk about the idea of healthism, another one of these isms that goes along with sexism and racism and all the else. Whereas if I'm healthy, then I'm a better human than you, so this kind of stuff is a whole other issue that is sort of going on. And I certainly, like you, want to see ways that this tech can really help, people who are not necessarily into health and fitness in the first place. So I'm really glad, that you said that. And I think that helps frame things for all of us, where it's like, okay, for all of you listening who are biohackers and in the space that Joe and I are in, that's great, right? And definitely look for that kind of stuff. But also keeping in mind that not everybody is going to have use of this or can use this stuff. And we should be thinking about collectively as a society, which of these pieces of tech, and maybe even guessing on which of these pieces of tech are going to be the most useful for most people. So, Joe, tell us where, I know Fitt Insider, right? You guys are on Instagram, but tell us where people can find you in particular, if you're, and also how to get involved with Fitt Insider. One of the things I like about you, as I've been looking at Fitt Insider, is if you're into this kind of conversation that Joe's educating us on, Fitt Insider is constantly showing different tech that's coming and reporting on that tech. So where can they get more of you and more of Fitt Insider?
Yeah, just check it out. It's all free. It's insider.fit.co. Newsletter, podcast, a bunch of different news articles, resources, and we're super accessible through there. So yeah, hit us up.
Insider.fit.co. Joe, thank you, my friend. I really appreciate you coming on and educating all of us. It was wonderful to meet you, my man.
Likewise.